2, GMPs. And as we go through it, I want you to think about a few questions here that you should be able to answer. What are quality and GMPs? Are they the same? Are they different? Lab testing. If you're familiar with state marketplaces, you know that there's a strong emphasis on final product testing from independent third-party laboratories. What's the relationship between lab testing, quality, and GMPs? Let's time out. What the heck are GMPs? Literally, what are they? Folks that don't like GMPs or come from, say, the pharma route might use it. It's not uncommon to hear, get more paper. And all right, there's some truth in that. Let's be real. This is about documentation. Where did GMPs come from and the concept come from? And let's just check our assumptions at the door. Are GMPs truly appropriate for products containing cannabinoids? So first, I kind of want to set the landscape here. GMPs are a subsector of an overall quality management system. And if you look at the way I've placed this, you've got this overall quality management program, right? This is everything from quality policies to your policies, manuals, standard operating procedures. It involves senior management commitment. It's high level, kind of a philosophy, a way of life, I would argue. And quality management exists from customer service based companies to Boeing and airplane design to tires and auto manufacturers. Total quality management is what really led the revolution of Toyota back in the 80s and Japanese car makers in the 80s and 90s. Now within quality management is quality assurance. Think of quality assurance. It's like I want that assurance. It's more proactive, right? This is a proactive mitigating approach. Within quality assurance are GMPs. So now you see how we're starting to get really specific, and I'll define GMPs in a moment here. And then finally is quality control, QC, and that is what third-party testing is. So think about how we have quality control minded programs in place, but without these bigger picture envelopes to mitigate risks. This is really just a simple test. And I would argue there's no weight in assuring that a single product test and single certificate of analysis is representative of a full batch without having these other layers of the onion. So again, QC laboratory controls, there's few internal QC labs because of this requirement for an independent operation of a testing lab. And we've kind of created this state mandated one size fits all testing program. And, a big shout out to what you mentioned earlier, Drew, with the work you guys have done to try to, synthesize and digest all these different requirements, because in the online tool that you have, you're calling out this like one size fits all and showing how in Florida, we've got, a certain number of pesticides, and that's very different than what we're looking for in Colorado and Washington. And is there any correlation? Is there any scientific justification as to why we're testing for certain things and not others, or why we're not even including quality assurance or GMPs in the program? We'll talk about that in a moment. And also, it's not product specific. So go back to talking about the route of administration. An inhaled product versus an ingested product versus an applied product perhaps should have different risk profiles, but that data is lacking. So what are GMPs and why should you care? At a basic level, good manufacturing practices, which is what GMPs stand for, is a system for ensuring that products are consistently produced and controlled according to quality standards. So again, there's that word quality and standards. You can't get away from it. You can think about it by breaking it down to kind of like 6 buckets. GMPs include staff training, management commitment, risk management, includes making sure you have quality management systems, again, which is that higher level of the onion. The facility, site and facility management, it's more than just what happens within those walls, but are those walls constructed well? Can pests or rodents get in, or contaminants? What's outside? What's going on up the street, upwind? Pesticide drift, folks that are familiar with ag. You have to consider what's around you, not just what's going on in that room, on that piece of equipment, on that day. It involves product control. the whole design process of creating a formulation, verifying its consistency, and verifying at the end through quality control that you have control of your product, that it's meeting those expectations and specifications. And of course, staff training. I mean, that is such an important aspect. Folks, what I love about the cannabis industry is that there's a lot of passion. People are in it because they're driven and they're excited to make an impact on the world, but they need training and direction. There's a difference between being an advocate and a fan of the plant and understanding how to work in a production facility where the actions that you take have the potential to impact in a positive or negative way thousands of consumers or patients. Another way to think about it that might be easy to digest is the magic GMP triangle, as I like to call it, where you've got essentially three parts of the equation, right? You've got personnel and organization, everything from, again, training, org chart, job roles and responsibilities, to materials and processes, not just the cannabis plant, but what else is in there? Think about these edibles. Think about, concentrates or vape pens. If it's 68% THC and 6% cannabinoid terpenoids, what's the other 26%? Is that other 26% safe or not? What about the contact of the packaging material? There's different grades of plastic, there's different grades of glass. When a product sits in the shelf for 6 months, whether it's in your refrigerator, there's on a storefront or out at ambient temperature in your house, what's happening? Is there an interaction with the actual packaging contact material that's happening? You have to evaluate that. And then, the equipment in the rooms, right? So back to that facility, think about the rooms being designed fit for purpose. Think about the equipment, not having, pieces of, metal break off and end up in your food. All these considerations are core to, the GMP triangle. But why, right? Is this like a concept that when I founded the GMP Collective in 2018, decided I'm going to make this term good manufacturing practices? No way. This goes back decades, if not honestly centuries. There's some really famous, unfortunate cases in history that have led to the need and establishment of good manufacturing practices, not just in the US, but globally. Folks may or may not be familiar with the poisoning of sulfanilamide amide back in 1937. We had over 100 deaths across 15 states. In 1957, this was a major issue. The thalidomide was not approved in the United States, but it was approved in Europe for morning sickness in pregnant women. However, clinical trials at the time mostly used white men, and we did not look at the impacts to pregnant women. What happened? Over 10,000 worldwide cases with a 50% mortality rate. This is significant and led to a lot of reform and addition of good manufacturing practices and preventive controls. In 2012, I'll speak about that briefly in a moment, there was a major meningitis outbreak in a New England compounding center in Massachusetts that was producing steroid injections. And that led to, I believe, 100 million, let me just double check my notes here. This led to, a major, over 400 lawsuits filed, almost 700 injuries, and over 64 deaths. So this is significant. Most of those executives are in jail now, and there were significant fines. And what was one of the root causes identified? They were failing to follow GMPs. And so if you take a step back, you think about GMPs, where GMPs apply, and I like to use the word flavors, and there's different flavors of GMPs. So for something that's being injected into the body, more, tighter controls on sterility, having clean rooms, having robust environmental monitoring with particulate counts of, viable and non-viable bacteria is critical. But when you're making a food product, doesn't mean that you don't have to worry about those things, but maybe the limits and the controls do not have to be as strict. Again, tying back to some of the, when you think about 68% THC and 6% terpenes in a vape product, what's the other 26%? Well, if you're familiar with the Valley outbreak that happened in late 2019 and 2020 before COVID took over our lives, that's exactly what happened. It was those excipients or diluents, depending on the language and the lexicon you're familiar with, those other ingredients that don't cause the effect of of consuming cannabis, but are carriers that help with the oil, the viscosity of these products. So that's a really important aspect that we're commonly overlooking that GMPs require you to evaluate. So I kind of like to think about this by asking a fundamental question. How does fresh cannabis, or how should fresh cannabis become ready for sale, whether it's at a dispensary for medical or adult use? Should it really look any different than the cinnamon tree, the cinnamon bark, or the pepper tree, and how it transforms into something that you buy at the market at your local grocery store? There's basic GMPs for that. The Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, working with the World Health Organization, developed Codex Alimentarius. This goes back actually to 1969, the original codex for food safety. And this revision that was last updated in 2014 is the Code of Hygienic Practices for Spices and Dried Aromatic Herbs. Good hygiene practices, basics that ensure that by the time your product gets to the storefront, it's safe, it's going to last for a determined shelf life, etc. The need for GMP is key, is critical. And I'll show you in a moment there are some states that are developing good manufacturing and requiring good manufacturing practices, but we still have a long ways to go. This is a book I'm personally a fan of. This is a consultant I have worked with quite a bit, full disclosure, by Kathy Knudsen, PhD, Food Safety Lessons for Cannabis-Infused Edibles. With, I love her chapter title, Good Manufacturing Practice Compliance is Not Optional. And I'll take a quote from her book. The food industry and dietary supplement industry would never think to label their product as coming from a GMP compliant facility. Why? Because the food and dietary supplement industry knows that product safety is built on GMPs and that GMPs are just a given, right? So again, I ask the question, why are we slow to adopt these requirements in the cannabis industry? GMPs, right? I was mentioning the flavors. There's food GMPs, there's dietary supplement GMPs, and there's pharma GMPs. Those are the three main GMPs that the FDA oversees at a federal level. And those are found in the Code of Federal Regulations. Just an example, CFR Part 21, Title 21, Part 117 is GMPs, hazard analysis, and risk-based preventive controls for human food. That's a mouthful. Suffice it to say, there are GMPs for pretty much every product type that you get from the grocery store, convenience store, drugstore, etc. You've got pharmaceutical GMPs. There's even cosmetics through ISO, which you are likely may be familiar with as an international organization for standards. That's going to tie into standards that I'll bring up shortly. You've got medical devices. Again, this is not a new concept. The World Health Organization has existing guidelines for herbal medicines. And I would argue it's not a far stretch to think of the cannabis sativa plant and its preparations and extracts thereof being classified as herbal medicines. So we have these solutions. We don't have to come up with this on our own and reinvent the wheel. These are in place that we can use today. Canada, slightly different approach. Everybody's got to be special, right? They develop GPPs, good production practices for cannabis. So again, just to reinforce, what are the fundamentals of GMPs? First law of GMPs, I would argue. Quality cannot be tested into processes or products. Go back to the lab testing and how most states are currently saying, as long as you pass that final test by a third party, you're good. You're testing quality into the product by that. That doesn't even make sense. You don't develop a whole car and all the brake components and the brake fluid, and you put it all together and you say, all right, let's see, I'll grab one out of every 1,000 of these and make sure they don't fall apart and that the brakes work and the car starts up. All right, it's good. No, there's a ton of checks, quality checkpoints, right? Risk assessments upstream that goes into ensuring that by the time you get to the final test, it's essentially a formality to just verify. So again, quality is built in from the beginning in all stages of the process. This is proactive preventive measures, and it balances the need for easily understood minimum standards with the need to encourage innovation, because we don't want to just stifle business and industry. We need to have sufficient safeguards so that by the time a product gets to market, that we have a high degree of assurance that these products are going to be safe. Recalls are the exception. not the rule, because again, this really minimizes the risk to health and safety of the consumer prior to final testing and release of product. Good news, don't worry about reading all this, but I've just excerpted several state regulatory statute or rule language where GMPs are built into the cannabis framework. There's, I believe, approximately 9 or 10, I forget the last number, of states that have some form of GMP referenced in their regulations. And again, these are just some examples from, for example, Alabama, right? They've got CFR 21 CFR part 210. They define pharmaceutical grade. They talk about GMPs. Connecticut talks about GMPs. Florida talks about food safety GMPs. Maryland as well, and then Michigan are just examples. Now, again, the good, bad, and ugly of this. Good, we're not reinventing the wheel and we're putting some references to GMPs and making it mandatory. The interesting part is back to, does one size fits all? Do food GMPs really make sense for a product you're inhaling or a product that really should be a tablet and a drug? There's, some valid discussion on that to be had. So that's where I'd say maybe states have a great opportunity for improvement, but this is a fantastic start and encourages me to see where we're going. This is just to tie back into some of the issues of why we need GMPs, right? Go back to product testing and the work of the National Safety Council. They put this in a great visual diagram to just highlight some of these crazy examples. So in Arizona, they test for 4 heavy metals in final products. These are known as the classic 4. Dietary supplements are required to test for these as well. New York, they took it a step further. They started to recognize that maybe we need more than just the minimum 4. They also recognize that perhaps there's a difference between an oral route of administration, I'm going to eat this product, and I'm going to inhale this product. It's going to go straight into my lungs and be absorbed across the blood-brain barrier. And as you'll see, perhaps no surprise logic that almost a tenfold, it's not consistent, but the limits for inhalation are significantly lower than oral ingestion because of variables such as like your stomach acid and how that interacts, and other metabolic and physiological aspects that I am no way qualified to speak about. Again, just some more examples of the patchwork. What's an acceptable limit of aspergillus? Should we be testing for aspergillus? Should we be testing for total yeast and mold? At what limit do we decide the product's safe or the product's not safe? What's different about Utah and Minnesota and Florida? That means that somebody consuming a product in Florida that may have 50,000 CFUs of microbial, what makes that safe but unsafe for Utah? Kind of an open question, and I'm sure you can get, there's many reasons for this that are not well versed in science because we don't have the data by and large. However, there is some arguments and some resources that do exist that folks can use to drive consistency here.